right, the title of the notes is Sampling, Good and Bad. It says at the top there, you can hardly go a day without hearing the results of a statistical study. These are just some that I grabbed off of the internet, and I just Googled like statistics in the news. Business in the desert Southwest is growing at a rate twice the national average. 38% of college freshmen never return to college for their sophomore year. And a recent study shows that lack of sleep increases the risk of catching a cold. Okay, you just have to be really careful when you read those things because you need to know whether you can trust the results or not. And that all depends on how the data were produced. So you're taking statistics. That means you are a statistician. That means you need to be aware of and concerned with how data is gathered. And so you're going to learn how to do that slowly over the course of this chapter. I actually want to start with telling you how to sample badly, okay? Some things that people do incorrectly as they're gathering data that create some bias in the results. And so here are three things that I want to get through, like you can kind of think of them as vocabulary words or concepts that I want to get you comfortable with. Remember in your quiz on Friday, you're going to have a vocab matching section. These might show up in there. I actually can't remember which ones I put in there, but I want you to be very comfortable with what a convenience sample is versus like voluntary response sample. So let's look at these. A convenience sample is choosing individuals from a population who are easy to reach. You're just surveying or sample. Your sample is based on how convenient it is. Convenience sample. Here's an example of that, okay? Suppose you're doing a study on how long students at, I don't know, Friendship High School spend doing homework last week. So you stand in the library and you ask the first 30 students who walk into the library how much time they spent on their homework. That's a convenience sample because you are just standing there and it's pretty convenient for you that the first 30 students that walk in, you ask them how much time they spent on their homework. Okay, they're easy to reach. We're going to talk about in just a second why that could create bias. What is bias? Bias is consistently underestimating or overestimating in some instances. Bias is consistently underestimating or overestimating the value you want to know. Bias is not just bad luck, it's the result of bad study design. Bias is the result of bad study design, which is going to cause you to consistently miss the truth. So when bias is present, your results are either going to overshoot or undershoot the truth. So in that little library thing, the convenience sample, one reason that convenience sample of you standing there in the library might cause some bias is because students who hang out in the library before school are probably going to be those who spend a little bit more time on their homework. They might be more studious. So asking these 30 students would overestimate the average time that Friendship High School students as a population spend doing their homework last week. Okay? So convenience sample. Look at voluntary response sample. What is that? Voluntary. Consists of people who choose to be in the sample by responding to a general invitation. Individuals choose to be in the sample by responding to an invite. Like, I'm going to take a poll, and I want you to call in and tell me your opinion on something, or text it, write it. A lot of internet polls nowadays rely heavily on voluntary response samples, okay? These types of surveys attract people who feel strongly about an issue. I would like you to underline that. I want it to stand out. Inviting people to take a survey is great, but what you're probably going to end up doing, depending on how you do the invite, is you're going to get people who feel really strongly about an issue to respond to that. It's like the really angry people that go online and leave the 1-star reviews because, you know, they have a very strong opinion about it. and who often share the same opinion, which leads to bias. So two types of samples that I've talked about, convenience sampling and voluntary response sample, and why those can each lead to bias. Here's an example. Online polls. It says, the athletic department at El Dorado Community College wants to learn more about the physical fitness of students at the school, including the number of push-ups that students can perform. Okay, so pause. Before we get lost in this problem, the whole entire point is the athletic department wants to learn more about the physical fitness of students at the college. And one way they're going to measure this is the number of push-ups that students can do. Let's see how they gather their sample. Okay. To obtain their sample, the athletic department sets up a booth at the center of campus with a sign that says, free physical fitness testing. Explain why this sampling method is biased. Is the mean number of push-ups for the members of their sample likely to be greater than or less than the mean number of push-ups for the entire student body? So if you're kind of confused at how we're going to give our answer here, I want you to kind of imagine this, okay? There's a booth in the middle of, let's say, Texas Tech campus, and it says free physical fitness testing, okay? I'm trying to gauge how physically fit students are on average at Texas Tech University. Why would this be a poor way to set up the study? Can anybody tell me why?
Because the people that will volunteer to do it are probably going to be more physically active.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to be one that walks by and I'm like, hey, in front of all these people, I'll take a physical fitness test. No, okay? So bingo. You're probably going to get people that, you know, especially when they find out it's how many push-ups can you do, people that are confident in that, people who are naturally physically fit. So let's kind of take a note of that. Get ready to write a paragraph, okay? So listen, and you can just write as I say it out loud so you don't have to keep looking at the screen. Here we go. It's likely that only physically fit students, it's likely that only physically fit students will volunteer for testing. It's likely that only physically fit students will volunteer for testing. Students who aren't in shape are unlikely to do push-ups in front of everyone. And this is just in my own words, okay? So students who aren't in shape are unlikely to do push-ups in front of everyone, so they're not going to stop for the free physical fitness test. Now let's answer this second part. So we've answered the part that says, explain why this sample method is biased. What I just wrote in orange addresses that. Explain why this sampling method is biased. Now the second part of this question says, is the mean number, like the average number of push-ups for the people who stop at this little booth in the middle of campus, is that going to overestimate or underestimate the average number of push-ups that students can do as a whole on the campus? What do you think? It's going to overestimate, right? Because the people that stop are going to be good at push-ups, and we're going to think, wow, people on campus are really physically fit. They can do a lot of push-ups. But that's probably going to overshoot it. So how you can answer that part is the mean number of push-ups in the sample, the mean number of push-ups in the sample is likely, we could get lucky and it could be right on the money, but it's likely to be an overestimation of the mean number of push-ups for the entire student body. It's likely to be an overestimation of the mean number of push-ups for the entire student body. And that's how we're going to wrap that one up. So you'll have homework problems like this, where you have to describe in your own words. If you can make it shorter and sweeter and to the point than that, that's great. Okay, let's look at the second example. Just got a couple of examples back to back here. For the following situations, identify the sampling method. So if you're asked to identify the sampling method, that means tell me if it's a convenience sample or a voluntary response sample. Then explain how the sampling method could lead to bias. So let's look at the situation A right here. And it says, a farmer brings a juice company several crates of oranges each week. Okay, so I'm the farmer, I grow these beautiful oranges, and you guys are gonna buy them from me, and I bring you these crates. A company inspector looks at 10 oranges from the top of each crate before deciding whether to buy all the oranges. What's wrong with that? He's taking a sample of 10 oranges from a crate. What's wrong with the type of sample he's using? What type of sample is that? It's a convenience sample. Why? Because they're just right at the top. Okay, so out of convenience, you just grab the first 10 oranges you see on top. Why is that a problem, though? Why is that probably not going to be representative of all the oranges in the crate? What might I do as the farmer trying to sell you my oranges? Probably going to put the really nice, pretty, big, shiny ones on top. Also take into account that, like, if the crates are really big, maybe the oranges at the bottom of the crate are kind of smashed and bruised and not so pretty. So taking them off the top might overestimate the quality of the oranges. So we're going to put all that together. So here's what you can write. This is a convenience sample. The oranges on top will likely, we always throw that word in there just in case, likely, it's not certain, will likely overestimate the quality of all the oranges from the farmer. And I think that's the shortest way to write that answer. The oranges on top will likely overestimate the quality of all the oranges from the farmer, because they're going to be the pretty ones. All right, if you feel comfortable with that. Part B is a little bit more to read, but I think that this one will also be kind of easy for you. According to a recent article in the Huffington Post, 55% of adult females sleep with a dog. 2 of my 3 dogs sleep in the bed, and they drive me nuts. The report was based on a study from researchers at Canisius College, which included the following sampling method. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read the sampling method. We're going to say, is it a convenient sample or a voluntary response sample, and what's bad about that? We emailed invitations to females who had previously participated in studies conducted by the Canisius Canine Research Team. In the invite email, we included a link to the survey and asked recipients to share with their friends via email and social media sites. We also advertised the survey on the Canine Research Team Instagram page. Okay, what kind of sampling method is it if I invite you to participate via email or I set up a link online? It's the voluntary response kind, okay? And that may not seem like there's anything wrong with that, but let's write, this is a voluntary response sample but we need to address why that might lead to bias. And that's kind of laid out for you right here back in this definition box. You're going to attract people who feel strongly and who often share the same opinion, right? And think about this. You see the word canine? What you're doing is you're inviting people who are already inclined to be like dog people to answer the question, does a dog sleep in your bed or not? So that 55% is probably going to overshoot the actual number of adult women who have a dog sleeping in the bed with them, because you're asking dog people to answer a dog question. So do you see how that could lead to some bias there? What you would really want to do if you wanted to figure out the percentage is you would want to ask just generalized group of people. You'd want to pick a better population to pull your sample from and pull your sample in a better way, which we'll talk about later in the chapter. So, I don't know, let's sum this up by maybe saying people who respond, people who choose to respond are likely dog people. And I'll just put that in quotes because you know what I mean if you're a dog person. So the 55% is likely to be an overestimate. We can just leave it at that. If you're looking on Schoology at what I wrote originally in these notes, and I can just say it out loud, you don't have to write it. Another source of bias, another thing kind of wrong with this little survey right here about the dogs, is the fact that the links are actually on their Instagram page. Because again, if you're a person who is already following them on social media, you're a dog person, so your link, their link on there means that people who love dogs are going to respond. And that's pretty much it. So those are some bad ways to pull samples for surveys, experiment studies, and so forth. Now let's talk about the right way to do it. The best way to avoid bias is to let chance choose the sample. Underline it, highlight it, something. If you are designing a study and you want to pull a sample of people, the best way to do that is to allow chance to do it. That's where random sampling comes in. There's a vocabulary word for you. Let's fill in these blanks. Random sampling consists of individuals from the population who are selected for the sample using a chance process. I will show you actually how to use your calculator to randomly choose. Maybe you want to choose 10 people from this class to do something or to ask a question to. There's a lesson coming up where I'll show you how to do that in the calculator, okay? But you want to make sure that your sample is random, that individuals are selected by chance. Now, this is hugely important. This will end up being a test question. Even if you choose your sample well, listen to how I'm saying this, so even if you choose your sample perfectly, it's completely random, okay? And even when samples are chosen well and are random, there are other potential sources of bias in, I have no idea what I wanted to put in that last blank, to be honest with you, because I don't have my answer key over here. But that's okay. Even if I choose a sample at random, there are other sources of potential bias, okay? Let's talk about those now. What else could go wrong? Even if I choose a completely random group of people, I do all of that correctly. Here are some things that can go wrong. Okay, the real problems start after the sample is chosen. Some of the most serious sources of bias come from undercoverage and response. So here's some vocab for you. What is undercoverage? Undercoverage occurs when some members of the population cannot be chosen in a sample. When some members of a population cannot be chosen in a sample. And if you'll turn the page, there's a kind of an example of that for you. Here's an example. If I just survey households, okay, if I just send out surveys to addresses, home addresses, then I'm going to miss out on a lot of the population. Homeless people don't have addresses, okay? And I want to make sure that I'm representing, let's say I want to represent everybody in the community with a survey. I can't just send out surveys to home addresses. We're going to miss out on homeless people, people who are in prison, even students in dorms. They don't have a home address. So we're leaving out parts of the population. That's under coverage because they cannot be reached. The results of such survey have bias due to under coverage would be the little phrase that you would use there. If the people not covered differ from the rest of the population. Okay? So under coverage is when you can't reach everybody. Non-response is exactly how it sounds. It's when people don't respond. You ask them to be a part of your study, but they just don't respond to you. So it occurs when an individual chosen for the sample can't be contacted or refuses to participate. Sometimes the refusal just comes in the fact that you don't hear back from them at all. Non-response to surveys often exceeds 50%, even with careful planning and several follow-up calls. If the people who respond differ from those who don't, then there's going to be biased results. So again, these are things that can happen even if you choose your sample really well. You can't help it. Sometimes people just aren't going to respond. Okay? Non-response. And here's some other things that can go wrong. Other types of problems. Non-sampling problems. And again, that just means I choose the sample really well, but there are some things that are going to be out of my control or maybe in my control that I need to think of. People might lie about information they feel is too personal, like age, weight, income, mental health, substance abuse. So it gets tricky when you're giving a survey about those things because people might lie. They might be embarrassed. People might misremember details, like how many hours. If I asked you how many hours you spent on social media last week, you would have to kind of just make up an estimate, right? But you wouldn't be able to give me an exact without looking at the time that you spent. So people might misremember and make things up. They may make up answers to questions they don't understand. Sometimes there might be a language barrier. And again, if somebody's embarrassed, they're just going to give a random answer without clarifying. This next point, I think, is probably common sense here. The gender, race, age, ethnicity, or behavior of the researcher or interviewer. Let's put interviewer/researcher there. Gender, race, age, ethnicity, or behavior of the interviewer/researcher can also affect people's responses. I may be uncomfortable answering some survey questions about myself if a man is surveying me versus a woman. If I feel like I have something in common with this person, then that might lead me to be more honest. So those things you have to also take into account. A systematic pattern of inaccurate answers in a survey leads to response bias. That's the name of this group of issues that we're talking about right now. It's called response bias. Bias in the way people respond to your survey. response bias. And we're almost done. There's not like a whole lot to do here other than just listen and fill in blanks. The wording of questions, so this is the last thing I want to touch on. How you word questions in a survey is actually one of the most important influences on the answers that you get. Confusing or misleading questions can introduce strong bias. Changes in wording can greatly affect a survey's outcome. Even the order in which questions are asked matters. Don't trust the results of a sample survey until you've read the exact questions. Here's an example, okay? If a sample of college students are asked these two questions, how happy are you with your life in general on a scale of 1 to 5? That's the first question. And the second question is, how many dates did you have last month? How is that going to change if I reverse the order of those questions and you have to answer first, how many dates did you have last month, and then how happy are you with life? How's that going to change? I mean, it might seem kind of silly, but it will affect the results. If I flip the order of that, what am I bringing to the forefront of their mind first? How many dates you had last month, okay? And if you had a lot and you felt confident, then you would probably give a higher rating on how happy you are. If you're like, oh, I haven't had any dates last month, as a matter of fact, I haven't had a date in a long time. And then the second question is, how happy are you with your life in general? You're probably going to rate it a little bit lower. So the wording matters, the order of the question matters. I mean, there's so much detail involved in these things. It's really a science. There is almost no association between responses when questions are asked in this order. And then this just says what I told you. Reversing the order of the questions, and students will basically give higher ratings of happiness the more dates that they've had. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there wasn't anything for us to do with that other than me just tell you the information. Feels kind of weird for me being a math teacher, but that's it.